Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Hopkins, and I'm from JWT London, and I'm a creative technologist. Sounds like the beginning of some sort of AA admission. So for those of you who don't work with creative technologists, who might not know what CTs do, at JWT on day-to-day, we look at emerging technologies, and we look at how cultures are starting to adopt and use them, to look at how behaviour is starting to become native, and to look at how we can create relevant experiences for our consumers on behalf of our clients. The talk that I'm going to be talking through for the next 10 minutes is titled The Paradox of Choice versus Social TV, which sounds a little bit grand, so I better get into it. So I've only got one slide in my elaborate PowerPoint presentation, such that I love PowerPoint so much. This is actually a cartoon from The New Yorker, but it's actually also part of a book called The Paradox of Choice, written by author Barry Schwartz. And when I was thinking about how excited and generally overly geekily excited I get about technology and the idea of view on demand and how we can watch anything at any time, anywhere, anyhow, on any device, you get really quite, elated at the prospect. You suddenly feel very empowered. But what Barry does is he posits a different spin on it, which I actually think is really, really important and fundamental to the role of social in TV moving forward. And I'm going to read you a very quick quote from Barry. When we have no choice, life is almost unbearable. He gets a little overdramatic occasionally. As the number of available choices increases, as it has in our consumer culture, the autonomy, control, and liberation this variety brings are powerful and positive. But as the number of choices keeps growing, negative aspects of having a multitude of options begin to appear. As the number of choices grows further, the negatives escalate until we become overloaded. At this point, choice no longer liberates, but debilitates. So we're at a point when VOD is pretty much upon us, and we're getting to a point where our bandwidths are allowing us to enjoy high-definition content coming straight down the pipe. But we need a frame of reference. We need context when dealing with that amount of information. If we look at the rather blurry cartoon, you can see that it's a man and a wife just coming into a brand new apartment, and the caption reads, "A world of unlimited choice." And the woman's coming in, she's representing the positive, saying, "Oh, Richard, the possibilities." Richard, on the other hand, is the sort of counterbalance to that. Because whilst the initial fervour of unlimited opportunity and unlimited content is great, we have to start figuring out where we start. And when we look at traditional models of scheduled broadcast channels, a lot of that work's been done for us already. A lot of those choices have been made, and that reduces the barrier to entry. So when we're actually talking about choice doesn't necessarily come over as a positive. It can actually come over as a loss, because all of a sudden you've got to start thinking about researching this infinity in front of you. You've got to spend time trying to figure out what's right for you, what's relevant for you, and what might not be. So this can actually cause some anxiety. So if we sort of apply this to TV, we can actually sort of track it back all the way to the beginning and look at, say, the BBC in 1930. You would have probably been given about 30 minutes, I think it was 30 minutes of transmission a day, which at that time was absolutely revolutionary. But scarcity basically was the foundation of connecting people together, because there was only a certain amount of it. Then moving on to sort of 1960, if you were watching Coronation Street and someone said to you, "Did you catch Corrie last night?" Well, there were only two channels at the time. There was the BBC and there was ITV. So the chances were, again, based on scarcity, your connection to that content was based around the fact that it was limited. And Coronation Street was the only proper TV soap opera at the time. And then we move on to today, and we're in this period of transition at the moment, and we've got all our terrestrial channels, we've got our free sat channels. If you're a subscriber to Sky or BT Vision or Virgin Media, you've got all your extra packages, and those are just sort of standard transmission channels. And then beyond that, you've got different variations of catch-up, so you've got all your PVRs, so you might have your Sky Plus. So all the decisions that you've made about the content that you think you're going to miss start getting stockpiled in this hard drive. So eventually, all of a sudden, that's filled up to the max, and you've got to start making more choices and decisions about culling content that you didn't actually have the time to watch in the first place. Then you move on to also VOD, so you've got all your iPlayers and on, and now we're moving into IPTV and a more feasible view-on-demand environment. So it's just so fragmented, and the choices are so infinite. So social has to come in, and it plays this integral role in managing to bring a little bit of order to that chaos. So with any sort of decision-making process, you have to start looking to your friends. You have to start looking to commonalities. And within the social graph, we can see all of this multitude of different connections, because all of our friendships are based on different aspects. So it could be, where I come from, or it can be the type, I like football, or it could be I have this hobby or that hobby, and it spills over from different sort of like cycles or circles of social friends, moving up to peers and those that you have common interests with, and the interest comes before that friendship. But what that actually does is that takes infinity and actually starts containing it into a framework. And that's really where I see the importance of social moving forward, because social, we can look at social as a filter. We can look at social as instilling trust. We can look at social as providing a collective intelligence. Because if I like something and I decide to tell my friend about it, it's a pretty good bet that they might like it as well, because of the commonalities that we share. So if we start taking that into the context of some of the new products which are starting to come out of the States and gain some traction over there, so like Get Glue or Miso, if you're able to actually check into the TV program that you're watching and actually broadcast that to your wider sphere of friends, it might help them make a decision based on whether they might want to engage with that content or not. And that's really, really important, because that's a signpost for them. And when you get to see collectively how your friends are starting to engage with other content, you can start rationalizing how your friendship is forward with that person to determine whether or not that content is relevant to you. And it goes one step further as well, because social can also be used as a sensor, as a real-time sensor for engagement. So it's not necessarily just about you're watching this, I might like it. It might then transition onto, and looking at how Facebook and Twitter already operate in these spheres, how people engage to the point of commenting and how they start to connect. So you've got a lot of more of these sort of products coming out of the States, like Starling, who are looking to enable people to, in real time, connect to broadcast content, and also not only to the wider audiences who are watching it, say we're all watching Skins and we're all fans of Skins, but then taking that audience and then bringing that down just to your personal social networks as well. So you can then start to contain that conversation, and you can create a far more closer engagement with that content as well. So, just looking at my crib sheet. So in terms of brands and how they can start getting involved in this, it is really, really early days. You're looking at a lot of manufacturers who are getting involved and actually building this tech into their TVs and their products. And you're looking at how publishers are starting to enable their content for consumers based on maybe a dual screen, two-screen living room environment. And there aren't too many examples yet of brands really getting involved in that. But it's starting to happen. I mean, considering a lot of these services are very US-centric at the moment, we can stick our finger in the air and we can see some of these trends emerging and start making some guesses on how we might be able to implement them based on the content that we create. So brands need to be an enabler, so they need to be able to get involved with these services. They need to try and position themselves as granting access, as being filters for choice. They need to be filters in of themselves. And I've got another quote here, which I'll sort of wrap up on, which is consumers feel compelled to preserve options, even at great expense, energy, time, and money, even when it doesn't make any sense. When you want consumers to make a decision, close down their options to for me and not for me, but position your brand as opening doors and opening up new opportunities rather than closing them down. And that was from Dan Arrowley, who is a behavioural scientist who wrote Predictable Irrational. And that's how I'd like to wrap up. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Nutley. I'm Editor-in-Chief of New Media Age magazine. We're just doing the traditional laptop switchover, so bear with us for a moment here. What I should mention is the event is being live streamed, so you should, if you want to ask a question, you should think very carefully and ask something very smart. Also, you should wait for the microphone, because otherwise the very smart, very carefully thought out question is going to be a complete waste of time. So we do have the lovely Anna at the back who's going to be going around with a microphone, so please do wait for that to reach you. And say who you are and where you're from for the benefit of the speakers and the people watching the live stream. And Vincent, I think, is now ready to go. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon. I hope you're not freezing to death, because here it's quite tough. First of all, who we are, very quickly, we are part of the IHS group, and we are a market research company. We monitor all those sectors, and I'm the advertising person in it. So, first of all, 2 slides, some thoughts, and if I have some time left, I will give you a few numbers, because that's what we do at Screen Digest. We do numbers, so I will give you a few numbers to quantify the trends I've been mentioning. So, television and social media, what does it mean really? I guess we have to start by keeping in mind that television advertising seems to be challenged. It's been outgrown by pay TV globally, i.e. From a broadcaster perspective, from a television company perspective, there are now, on a global basis, more revenues from pay TV subscriptions than from advertising. And it's been outgrown by online advertising already in the most advanced market, notably the UK. So obviously, from a TV perspective, again, broadcasters need to innovate to keep up with advertising expectations. To be very specific, the expectations that now brands have being familiar with the opportunities and the possibilities, ref the cartoon, the possibilities of digital media, i.e. Scalability, flexibility, accountability, you know that. But of course the paradox is that telly is in fact the original social medium, as John was saying. Television has been about creating events, building communities around the coffee machine, and reality TV voting is the modern equivalent of perhaps Coronation Street 40 years ago. And it's amazing to see that despite the awesome choice people have today at their fingertips. Well, X Factor is huge. It's a huge social phenomenon, and it seems to be becoming. It seems to be growing year after year, and it's not only X Factor, but that whole reality TV phenomenon. So, in a way, TV is already social, but of course, the next step, and what we are talking about, is real time. Many to many, and a monetizable form of social interaction. And then we have to, of course, start by the fact that there are already measurable, large-scale return paths, platforms for social usage while watching TV. Facebook and Twitter on laptops or smartphones or iPhones. You remember the massive traffic on Twitter during the 2010 election debates. And of course, tablet PCs being in a way the best of two worlds between a laptop and an iPhone will bring that pattern of simultaneous TV watching and social browsing to probably a much higher level. At Screen Digest, we forecast that 8 million British consumers will be using tablet PCs or iPads by 2014. A second slide of thoughts. Connected TVs are now coming as a mass market product, and they will create further scale and new revenue opportunities by bringing social tools or brand within the TV environment without the need of an ancillary device for the return path and the interaction. Here I'm referring to the different initiatives around Europe, HBB and all these widget app ecosystem that is about to come to TV. And not only to people who have paid digital TV, but to potentially any household equipped with a connectable TV. Addressable linear advertising technologies at the same time, whether they are DVR-based, like Sky AdSmart, or IP-based, have the potential to combine social features with this many-to-many interactivity and, again, generate new marketing opportunities. At the moment, addressable TV plans, either in the UK or the US, are mostly based on demographic targeting, relatively traditional demographic targeting, or preference-based marketing. But socially targeted ads could well be implemented and add a recommendation layer and a great deal of efficiency. And it's going to be a very open and very competitive marketplace because we'll see traditional TV broadcasters, we'll see consumer electronics guys, we'll see big software companies, and of course big internet giants fighting, in fact, for turf here. And I'd like to finish those general thoughts by reminding that actually telly is still a very healthy medium. Suffice to remember that in 2010 has seen all-time viewing heights in at least 3 markets in Europe: France, UK, and Germany. Of course, the World Cup year had something to do with it, but despite all the hype, TV is still a relatively healthy medium. So stop me if I'm too long. Now I have some slides to illustrate what I've just said and give you some numbers to keep in mind too. First of all, I said that TV advertising is a mature business model. Yes, it is, and by comparison, pay TV is still a growing business model. So as a result, if you factor in pay TV, public funding, license fee, and TV advertising, you see the situation in Western Europe by now. TV advertising is probably about 40% of all television revenues, and pay TV subscriptions are the only business model that is growing in proportion. And compared to that, and of course, this advertising is still 90% plus traditional linear spot advertising or sponsorship. And everything we put under the category advanced TV advertising has been actually a bit of a disappointment in the past decade. It's been slow to take up and to generate a sizable amount of money to compensate the maturity of linear TV advertising. And at the same time, the online ecosystem has already become bigger than traditional TV advertising. This is the UK, so I'm sure you're aware of that. It's true to say that it's a little bit an unfair comparison because here we are showing total internet ad spend, i.e. display plus search. And you might say TV should be compared with display only, which in the UK is only about a third of total advertising, the rest being search. But still the trend is here. You have a market that's still growing, probably two-digit last year. TV did well, by the way, in 2010, but in the long term, we think TV growth will slow down again in the next 4 or 5 years. Of course, display has got a fantastic year in 2010, and it's going to accelerate. So from a television perspective, again, it's not necessarily great news because search was growing, but you could say search was partly growing out of direct marketing budgets or out of advertisers who wouldn't be on TV anyway, local retailers and so on. Display, on the other hand, really competes for the same budgets, for the same brands, And so the coming back of display with a revenge, thanks to behavioral targeting, social video, and so on, is in fact really a threat for TV because it's an alternative. And of course, the number that shocked everyone was the revelation that Facebook revenues were, I think, $1.2 billion in the first 9 months of last year. So about 1.5 billion globally on a yearly basis in 2010. And last one about the big picture. Here you see the big five West European markets, and you can see that after 2 horrendous years, 2008 and 2009, 2010 saw a rebound for traditional TV advertising with probably double-digit growth in the UK and France, and not too far from that in Germany. But past this rebound, which was mostly due to, in fact, very cheap costs, we now forecast that with a sluggish economy, TV growth is going to be a low digit number probably in a foreseeable future. Now, advanced TV advertising, what are we talking about exactly? Well, initially, we were talking about what's possible technically on broadcast platforms. So the daddy of all advanced advertising formats was probably the red button interactive ads, first developed by Sky in the early 2000s. It never really took off. In that category, we can also put everything that's set-top box based. Typically, again, the AdSmart project from Sky. But the new thing is, beyond the broadcast platform, as I said, due to connected devices, we now have possibilities, again, from a traditional broadcaster perspective or from a new entrant perspective. There are other possibilities. Online TV is one of them. We already know that there is a business model for ad-funded free video on demand. I mean, Catch-Up is, in fact, the free catch-up funded by pre and mid-rolls are in fact the only sizable business model today for alternative TV content exploitation. And we have connected TVs. And connected TVs, it's a major development because it's going to be built in we believe 90% of TV sets that are going to be sold in Western Europe in 2014. So it's going to bring interactivity to potentially every household, whether or not they have pay cable or pay satellite or anything. Well, I'm going to skip this one about DVRs. Yeah, I wanted to show that one to illustrate my point about connected TVs. And by the way, TVs are not going to be the only device to be connected to the internet. Game consoles are probably, as we speak today, the biggest home device to be connectable. But TVs are coming to the mass market. And as you can see here, by 2014, in EU3, that's UK, France, and Germany, we believe there will be 15 million TV sets sold in that year that will be connectable. And here I guess my point was to rebound on the idea of smartphones and laptops being already an available return path device for in terms of interacting with TV. Well, tablets, iPads are in fact the perfect device to do that, combining laptop and touch usage of iPhones. Well, here are our forecasts in terms of tablet PCs and iPad users in the UK only. We think it's gonna be a massive hit, and by 2014, about 8 million Brits will have one and use one. And there are reasons to think that it will boost the live interaction with what is on the main living room TV screens to yet another level. So I think that's all for me, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent and Ben. What I might do now is call all our four panelists up to the front while we're just sorting out the cabling and whatnot. Does anybody have any questions, any particular questions for Ben and Vincent before we move on? Anything about those two presentations that you want to ask, clear up, sort out? Okay, that's cool. In which case, I will ask our other two panelists just to introduce themselves. Emily, would you like to go first?
Yeah, hi, I'm Emily Dent from NM Insight. I'm the director of the UK. NM Insight is a joint venture between McKinsey and Nielsen looking at drawing insights from social media.
Hello, I'm Carla Getzi. I work for Facebook in Europe, and I look after media partners that are looking for ways to get their content into Facebook and ultimately drive traffic back to their properties. So I work with broadcasters, production companies, magazines, newspapers, anyone with great content.
Great. So this morning, anybody who was here, and I know a few of you were, we were talking about social media and how it pertains to TV programming, and that feels to me like a very kind of it's an established thing. We kind of know what social TV and programming how they're starting to fit together. With advertising, it feels a lot less formed. So maybe the first place to start with the discussion is to say, what are advertisers starting to do, and what do we see the opportunities for advertising to be at the nexus of social, TV, and advertising? Emily, you've got any thoughts on that?
That's a bit cruel. I think there are huge amounts of opportunity in this space. Connected TV and uptake of connected devices will open up opportunities to get engaged in content in ways that brands haven't been able to before. We've seen, I know that you had this content discussion this morning, but we're starting to see out of the States some kind of experimental campaigns where content is being overlaid with social activities and brands are starting to get engaged. This falls for me in the category of kind of event TV, which is where social obviously has a lot of purchase, I guess. So with the X Factors and the reality TVs, but where kind of more traditional content gets involved. I don't know if anyone saw the Grey's Anatomy example that happened this week, where Grey's Anatomy, a hugely popular TV program in the States and here, they overlaid a iPad app over the top, so the content reflected the experience that consumers could have. So the episode was about one of the characters tweeting. They created a Twitter stream for the character, and then users could get engaged whilst watching the TV program live with the character. Now, obviously, this kind of activity can open a lot of opportunities for advertisers, especially with the UK laws about product placement opening up in, I think it's February, March. So yeah, that's really where I see a lot of the opportunities coming.
Great, thank you. Carla?
I really liked the slide before that said social is completely reinvigorating display, because I'm working for Facebook. A lot of friends of mine say, oh, is there actually advertising on Facebook? Yes, there is. And actually, the most successful ads that we see running are those that are naturally socially engaging. And a lot of brands, in particular TV brands, use ads to create an appointment to watch, right? Maybe you've seen it on your Facebook page, don't say you haven't, to RSVP for a premiere, right? I mean, it's a really simple action, but it's just tapping into what people are already doing on Facebook. I mean, Facebook users make their TV experience social by getting on Facebook while they're watching the program. And definitely advertisers are tapping into that across the site and see really successful click-throughs.
Ben, do you want to?
I think there's a lot to be said about looking at the balance between active and passive viewing at this point, and especially as brands are starting to look to engage in these spaces. So, as Emily said, there are certain activities or certain formats of programming which really stimulate social interaction. So yes, your X Factors, but also like sporting events and stuff like that. So looking at maybe a UK example, because it's quite easy to draw some of them from the US, because they just seem to have got a little more traction. There's a lot more startups starting to create these products which brands can start to see if that might be the one to back for that particular environment. But Monte Rosa, my company, did some really good work for ITV, creating the ITV Live platform. And even though I'm a massive fan of iPlayer with the BBC, I really thought that ITV managed to push ahead with social connectivity when it actually recognised that the World Cup and equities like X Factor were causing so much social buzz that they wanted to become the enabler for their audience and enable people to start chatting about the common themes of these particular events. So from a brand point of view, I think that's a really, really good example of how brands can start to look to get involved by looking at the types of content and choosing wisely. Because if you're looking at something which is a little bit more lean back and a little bit more passive, consider what you're actually asking your audience to do. Are you asking them to learn a new interface, or are you leveraging something which is already getting traction? Is the priority for that programming embedded in the narrative and in just enjoying a good bit of TV? Or is it appropriate for you to start looking at what other content that you can sort of layer on? I think the Grey's Anatomy one's a really good example when they cleverly interwove it into that narrative. So I think it's about choice.
Yeah. Other things can be mentioned in terms of combining traditional TV content and a social element. I'm thinking of, for instance, the fact that a lot of people are looking for the best ads on YouTube. The famous example with the Cadbury gorilla. It's the key example of thanks to the web and to the buzz, a particular campaign being exponentially viewed and appreciated. And it's interesting to see that indeed the traditional television guys are trying to fulfill that desire and keep people in their ecosystem. For instance, Sky launched the green button, which allows you, when you see an ad, a piece of commercial that you like, you push the green button and it's automatically recorded and added in your recording box. So you can see it again later, or you can recommend it to one of your friends. So those are interesting examples. And I would say for brands, there are great opportunities in combining the most traditional form of passive linear television and the multiplication factor of viral and social. And the Super Bowl was 3 days ago. The Super Bowl is still doing fantastically well, both in terms of audience and advertising sales. And it's like the perfect launch pad for big brands to launch their new film, and they know they will generate a huge amount of buzz, and in the following days it's gonna have fantastic repercussions online in terms of their brand name being searched and their sites being visited and so on.
I think there's a really interesting thing. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago when Jay Altshuler from Unilever was speaking, and he was talking about some ads that they'd done for links, for Axe is in the States, where they'd shot it, they delivered this kind of fairly long form piece of content as a viral ad, almost as a test. They kind of chucked it out to a kind of their audience in the social space as a viral, seeing how it played, and then delivered and then recut it as a TV ad. And it feels like there's a quite an interesting opportunity to kind of test advertising in the social space, then bounce it back onto TV, and then bounce it back out again into the social space where to amplify the buzz?
Yeah, actually, perhaps I can mention something that happened at the IAB conference last year in Barcelona, Michael, and it was a gentleman from ABI, one of the biggest beer company in the world, and the guy was commenting on their decision. Interestingly, perhaps because they went listed, they went public, their decision to increase their digital advertising spending. And since it's a beer brand, they spend a lot on TV. But this year they decided that on top of what they spend traditionally during the Football World Cup, they would go massively online and massively through social media. And the reason for that is that their research tells them that people are on average trying 2 or 3 brand beers between the age of 16 and 20, and then they settle for 1 or 2 brands for the rest of their lives. So it's really important to catch the people between 16 and 20 or 22. And where are they? Yes, they are still on TV, but they are a lot on social networks.
Yeah. Do you want? I think that's a great example. We've seen I don't know if anyone saw the Chevrolet Super Bowl Glee program, where Chevrolet had a very similar experience where they recognized that in order to get people to be loyalists, or consumers to be loyalists to the brand, they needed to get them young. So they entered into a discussion with Glee, which turned into a song being made about Chevrolet during the Super Bowl kind of period. So huge amount of viewers and bang on target market. And obviously the in-game or in TV advertising would have been hugely successful and generated a lot of traffic. In fact, Chevrolet was showing up as one of the most buzzed about brands in the Super Bowl. So yeah, I think social activity, in addition to that, adds a huge amount of opportunity for targeting, more relevant targeting, and the opportunity to crowdsource ideas. So the kind of real-time social commentary around advertising will allow for greater insight, for better creative and product placement or placement of advertising in the campaign. So I think the social monitoring aspect is a really important aspect of any social TV advertising.
Add one last point to that. I think brands are getting really clever and saying, listen, let's save the money for the Super Bowl ad and make a really, really viral piece of content. And we'll put it on YouTube, we'll put it on Facebook, and we'll put it everywhere. And we'll call it a Super Bowl ad. I mean, just search on YouTube when you get back to your desks. No one's looking at YouTube at work, but and see how many Super Bowl ads you can find. I mean, they definitely didn't appear on TV. But because of this kind of, what we're talking about here today, is that doesn't prevent a brand from kind of leveraging all the excitement around Super Bowl advertising. So I thought that was pretty cool. I don't know that was happening in other years, but definitely this year, big surge of Super Bowl ads that you never saw on TV.
Ben, I realise you're not a creative, but you're here as a representative of an ad agency. How do JWT feel about this idea of crowdsourcing, of using an existing audience to test advertising?
I think it's exciting, but I think crowdsourcing or user or trying to encourage user participation needs to just be really, really well curated in terms of giving them the consumer the appropriate direction for what it is that you'd like them to do. It's not just about chucking things onto different social platforms and seeing how they might just automatically figure it out. It's about trying to create an experience which kind of encompasses that as well. So that's kind of it.
Emily, are there people that you would look at in the US and could say that they're starting to grasp that well?
Less on the content creation side, though there is quite a lot of the kind of crowdsourced creation, of the T-Mobile all those kind of advertising campaigns, which are obviously hugely engaging and social by nature. But it's actually the other end in the kind of concept testing and the ideas generation that we definitely work with advertisers to create strategy directly from the consumer's mouths, and that's where we're seeing the most amount of impact created from the social universe. Yeah.
Can you give us an example? Not mentioning any names?
The one that we talk about most often is Craft in the States, where we looked at the kind of social universe, and we tried to understand what the conversation was around times of eating, so that Craft could create a product around a demand or an unmet need. And it turns out that one of the unmet needs, which Craft wasn't at that time helping with, was late night burgers. So they created a product, which is pretty interesting, that was lived in your fridge until you wanted it at some ungodly hour in the morning post a lot of drinking. And that was based quite significantly on what people were saying. So there's a huge amount of opportunity in the social space to understand that unmet need for a brand, both in terms of creative and in terms of product. Yeah.
Thank you. Questions, ladies and gentlemen? Anybody got anything they want to say at this point? Anything you want to raise? Yes, sir. Could you say who you are for the benefit of the live stream?
Sure. I'm Nick Newman. I'm a digital strategist, write on social media, particularly around journalism, actually. One of the things that's always puzzled me is when you're talking about the device and the television in particular, because in many cases it's a family device, how you can really get the benefits of targeting and a lot of the things you were talking about, or isn't it really just another way of delivering mass ads to a large group of people? And so I guess my question is more around, is it actually going to be the television that's delivering social ads, or is it the more personal iPads and mobile phones, which is kind of my hunch in terms of where the opportunities lie. And I was slightly confused by the figures, whether, connected TVs, we saw the European 15 million and the UK figures for tablets going to 8, and I'm not quite sure how that stacks up in terms of real usage for some of these things, but my sense is that maybe it's more tablets than, for a few years at least, tablets and mobile phones.
I've got some facts which might help here. We did a 3-screen study, which is something that we do every year, or Nielsen did every year, and it was starting to uncover some quite interesting trends. Firstly, in relation to the TV has one place, but actually everyone in the family potentially has got their own personal device. So it's the interaction between, or in fact two. So, you have your smartphone, your iPad, and your TV, and it's the interaction between all three, potentially, that is quite interesting. And that experience in the room and outside the room, that is interesting. So the facts, 11% of online consumers plan or already own a tablet. So that's quite an interesting one. 1 in 5 online consumers has a definite interest in buying IPTV. And obviously this year in the UK is the big year for smart TVs. And in 2010, 60% of all viewers use the internet once a month whilst watching TV. So this is a definite trend and a definite opportunity.
Do you want to? Sorry.
All right, I'll go. I think that's a very good question. It's actually the billion-dollar question, right? Which is what would this experience look like on your set-top box or on your television? If you could bring your Facebook network, you'd bring your social graph to your television and actually start to kind of connect with all your friends, around the content that you're watching. That would be a great experience. But how does that actually work? None of us want to be kind of logging in and out of Facebook through our remote control on our TV at home, especially when we live with 4 other people. So, what does that really look like? And if anyone has any ideas, I'd love to hear it. No, but this is something that actually is being discussed pretty proactively right now, and we're seeing it definitely at Facebook and media companies trying to actually solve this because there is so much potential there. And I really think it's about kind of there's still a ways to go, but using kind of learning technologies and trying to understand kind of actually what and times of day and actually what habits are kind of with families and how you're viewing, and looking at how that kind of forms the social experience on the TV rather than kind of going for the obvious answer, which is, let's just bring kind of Facebook to the TV, because that's not a great experience. We don't want to be, just like we don't want to type in any login details on our phone, we definitely don't want to be doing that on our remote control. So I think, it's a far way off in that sense, because it has to be more clever than kind of what the obvious answers are today. But I think there's a lot to be said around kind of using learning technologies and trying to understand kind of what our behavior is in the home, and then matching that up with really great social experiences.
I think also looking back at how TV started off, TV was a social experience in the very beginning, because you'd only have one TV and it would be in the living room and everyone would gather around it, and that unit would be cause for discussion. And so it was a social activity. And actually, the more devices that we've managed to accumulate, TVs are now cheap, you might have 2, 4 in the house, but then you might also have laptops, and then you might also have your smartphones, and now tablets are being brought in. It's quite easy to see how the availability of all of these screens can actually cause domestic fragmentation, people going off in their rooms and doing, viewing different things. So social, in a way, manages to pull that back in. It manages to rebuild on that fragmentation. And it creates almost like a social peripheral vision, using these different devices to not only connect people in the immediate location, but also remotely as well.
And just to answer one aspect of your question, you were saying with reason that television is still a family experience, at least for a large part. And it's true that I don't know what a social ad means. I don't know what it means. The potential for addressability through broadcast TV these days is in fact targeting families, households, not individuals. Indeed, yes. But still, it would be a fantastic improvement compared to the carpet bombing we have today and the level of wastage of traditional television advertising. So it is worthwhile, in a way.
Question over in the corner.
Hi, I'm James Hamilton. I'm a planner at McCann Erickson. I'm slightly sort of concerned, perturbed about the quality of insight that social media is giving you. If craft need to turn to a social network to tell people, to find out that people are eating fried food late at night when they come in drunk. I mean, is that the level of insight you're getting there, or are we mining for something a little deeper?
So I think that's a great question. It all comes down to me for the business goals. What are you mining for? Now, in their specific case, they were specifically mining for product innovation. That was their question. So, yes, in that case, that's exactly what they were looking for, and it provided the business case for them to go forward with the product innovation. Obviously, in other cases, we're going to be looking at other questions and other data. So yeah, I think particularly with TV advertising, I was actually going to build on Vince's point that the opportunity with TV advertising and social is to act on the demand economy. So rather than the carpet bombing advertising that we've been seeing for the last 50 years, actually building back on the fragmentation and coming back to really targeted ads. And I think a lot of that information can be layered in through the data that you can get through consumers generating media online, so social media. And that's where I really think the insight business for this particular question can add value in a real-time manner.
I think the best example of a company or or brand that has really benefited from, and I don't want to use the word mining, but has really benefited from kind of learning about user behavior on across social media is Zynga. I mean, has there ever been a business in the past that has been able to kind of iterate and grow as fast as they have? And that's definitely due to learning about their users in such a sophisticated way that definitely goes beyond kind of late night burgers. So it's still a dark art. I mean, we can't replicate, there's not very many Zyngas out there. But I think their success is directly related to, the environment and what they've been able to learn based on social media behavior.
Anybody else? Any other questions? So, one of the things that I'm quite interested in is kind of expanding on some of the things that Vincent was saying about and Ben was saying about the on-demand world and how social plays against that in terms of as kind of the media patterns fragment, how social media acts to kind of deliver both discoverability and also to start building up an audience knowledge. Ben, do you want to talk? Can you talk a bit more about that?
I'll try to. It comes back down to collective intelligence maybe, and in terms of how through joint interest people can individually input aspects of their passion or what they've observed and inject that into the conversation. I think maybe using MTV over in the States, they actually started using one of the companies I mentioned earlier, which was Starling, to look at how they could coordinate the conversation based around their property live during the broadcast. So by using Starling, you can go onto the MTV portal and you can sign up and for an account, and you get your own particular little calling card. It's almost like a virtual playing card. And then you'll see that all the rest of the cast, they've all got their own ones as well. And then there are different cards representing different plot points and things that are happening within the episodes itself. And you can then annotate on top of these cards, and you can throw them into this stream, which basically represents the conversation surrounding that particular episode. And through more engagement and through more observation, they've kind of implemented a gamification layer as well. So you can actually unlock MP3s and you can win various different things like that. So again, I think that's how collective response can work in that scenario.
Anybody? Any more questions? So, if you're an advertiser looking to operate in this space, what can you learn from programming? What are the key lessons from programming that as we said, as I was sort of saying at the top, is kind of more established? What would you draw from these sort of social programming?
In terms of content and how broadcasters are generating.
Yeah, exactly. What broadcasters are doing. What are the lessons there for advertisers?
Complement the experience and don't interrupt it. Keep it simple. Try and create platforms which allow people to delineate information and to make choices easier. I think when it comes down to this type of, as publishers are kind of incentivized initially because they want to add layers of engagement to this. They are seeing this technology on the horizon. They know this needs to be incorporated into the product that they're doing. So brands need to look at that and they have to see where their point is. They have to look at what their brands represent and actually find a valid reason to engage in asking of people to engage with them when it comes to these additional layers of engagement. Because when it comes to these sort of relationships where you're actually consumers are having a direct relationship with content, and if they get stung a little bit, they remember a little bit longer than they do maybe in a passive state. So it's about being wise, and it's about picking your spot, and it's about understanding why you should be part of a particular conversation or why your content offers real engagement points. I'm just trying to think of an example off the top of my head, and I remember Honda doing a live broadcast ad a few years ago, where the parachute ad when everyone's jumping out the planes, and it was a really, really cool spot. And if I was Honda at that point and I had the access to start looking at how I might be able to leverage the second screen in this environment, then it could be like gamifying that particular scenario. Guess how many parachutists there are jumping out of that particular plane, because the event was live, so there are sort of some constraints to stop people gaming around it or exploiting it. But still, that seems fun to me. So don't just basically make content for content's sake.
I mean, how many people have seen Million Pound Drop? You have. Yeah. Really? Are you guys familiar with the show, the program? Great, cool. Didn't see a lot of hands go up. But, I mean, that's a great example, right? I mean, it's a live program. And I don't know if you've seen the Facebook game that was built to, and I don't like to use the word accompany it, because it's actually quite integral to the whole experience. And it's a really... It's a really cool experience. It actually works in the sense that they have hundreds of thousands of people, playing along with the game, and distribution is fantastic because, of course, using some really cool Facebook features and tools to kind of get game elements out into the wider audience. It works, and I think that's just kind of the beginning of the story, because if those hundreds of thousands of users are representing 10% of the viewing audience, once that starts to tip, that's where I think kind of brands can start to come in and have a bit more of an interesting experience. And definitely for content producers, I mean, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for ways to fund the great programs they want to make. But I think it definitely has to start with just making a truly social, fabulous experience, and then look at ways to kind of incorporate brands that are in a really targeted and kind of useful way. But yeah.
I think the only thing I would add to that is we recently did a study with Hulu, which is a on-demand service in the States, and they found that advertising on their platform was roughly 2 times as more effective than traditional TV. So there's something to be said for like the bespoke experience, or the choose your own adventure experience from the consumer, and being really, really clever about your targeting will actually get you huge returns, or better returns, which isn't really a new story, but has the opportunity with social connected TV.
Sir, question.
It's a bit of a recommendation, actually. This is a really interesting debate about the future of TV advertising, but I don't know how many people in this room have heard of a guy called Howard Gossage, who in the 60s was kind of talking about this stuff. I'd really encourage people to look him up, because he said things like people read what interests them, and sometimes it's an ad, and he developed communities around subjects like Irish whiskey, and he kind of lay at the heart of the foundation of the modern environmental movement based on this kind of approach. So it's just a kind of point that the future is really interesting, but I think there's some interesting past examples, which you talked about the 30s and television. I think looking back can teach us a lot.
I think also looking forward in terms of just addressing the point that the formalised way of distributing content for internet TV isn't totally established yet. We understand that it looks like it's going to take more of an application portal form as opposed to how we're used to dealing with traditional channels. So if you are a brand and you are looking to try and get involved in this space, they've got to try and understand, they've got to try and figure out how these formalised systems are going to work for them, because you can't just create an app every time you create a TV ad and then expect people to wait around for the ad to come on. Then you grab your iPad, then you try and find the app, then you open the app, and the app takes whatever time to load up, and all of a sudden the ad's gone. So it's got to be looking about how these sort of applications sort of work, and how this content is actually presented to the viewer, and how they can actually work within those systems. And until a lot of those have been worked out, it's quite difficult to see how, in terms of the mass, brands are going to be able to jump on this like tomorrow.
In terms of apps, what we learn from the mobile environment is that branded apps work when they are free and when they are providing a service on top of just illustrating the brand. So probably you have better examples than I have, but I'm thinking of Nike. I'm thinking of brands that are developed, creative and most of all useful apps that have been fantastic successes in terms of downloads. And possibly that's the way to explore in the TV environment too. Because otherwise you cannot expect people just to open your branded environment just for the sake of it, indeed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, actually. I think where the brands that will win are already the social brands, and this won't be news to them. The kind of golden rule of social, of have a conversation, don't shout at me, is really where this is going to win. Brands that really, really live that's where they're going to win. So I think really the lesson is how do you create a relationship with your consumer that goes beyond the 30 seconds that you get to shout about that relationship. How do you create content that encourages a relationship, and how do you measure that relationship for good rewards? And that all comes down to we have to build better social organisations, better talent, better systems in order to capitalise on those effects. You can't just expect it to be a marketing message or an advertising message. It has to run across the organisation in order to really profit from it.
Do we have a question down here?
Hi, I'm Andy Jones at Channel 4. This is a very young thing for us, isn't it? We're dipping our toes in the water, but we constantly talk about the US and what they're doing. How integrated are they? In total, are we a long way behind the curve? Are we catching up rapidly? And sort of what's the future for us, really?
We have no idea. No. I don't know, because I'm not a strategist. I don't really have stats to point to adoption. But, you're just looking at the fact that, Palo Alto, California, it's a hotbed for service production anyway. So the race is often running there, and, they've got... There's just so many of them. There's Media Friends, there's Vloop, there's Miso and GetGlue, which are check-in services, and they're all dipping their toe in, and they're all trying to figure out what sort of user behaviour will start getting traction. There's another one called Clicker, which I was looking at the other day, and that's almost like our version of the Radio Times, but actually with some of that check-in facility and some of that peer-to-peer sort of integrated into it. And it also then helps to offer you recommendations based on sort of your initial sort of direct query. So, as I say, not really very relevant for stats and adoption, but there are just so many different sort of services going out there, and everyone's just watching to see which ones sort of kick up. I've started to download so many of them on my iPhone, even though they're not relevant to the UK at all, just to try and get a whiff of how this is actually going to start being used by the main. And a lot of them, they're just going to fall off, and that's the nature of it.
Not about social, strictly speaking, but if your question is about where the US are in terms of addressable TV or interactive TV, in terms of opportunities, they are not well ahead of the UK, actually. Just a few days ago, DirecTV announced that they will be launching in August this year something which looks like Sky AdSmart a lot. Set-top box-based, addressable, linear advertising. And Project Canoe has been around in the US for many years, but they had a lot of problems to standardize interactive advertising. And in fact, now what they are doing is standardizing what in the UK Sky has been giving up recently, which is red button, or good old red button advertising. So in a way, they are even behind the UK. I would say UK is at the forefront of that sort of thing in the world.
It's great to have someone from Channel 4 here, because I think one of the problems that we're facing both here and, in Europe and in the States is an infrastructure one. How do we cope with the amount of data that this is going to generate? I'm not even sure our old crusty wires are going to be able to stand the heat kind of thing. So there's a true infrastructure problem that we do have to solve in order to really release the innovation that can happen. I would also not just look to the West, but look to the East. A lot of innovation is obviously happening in China and Japan, where quite a lot of this technology is coming from. And then I would look to other industries. So gaming is where a lot of this social is coming from, social trending, but also in the way that consumers, get this content. In-game advertising has been happening for a long time, and TV is actually quite a way behind that industry. So some of the behaviours around gaming are really interesting and will cross over, and quite a lot we're seeing happen in Facebook. But if you look to China and Korea and Japan, a lot of this is embedded in people's lifestyles already. So I expect a lot of innovation to come from that part of the world.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. If anybody's got one they want to ask. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Paul Squires. I publish an online magazine called Empirica. Actually, there are two parts to one question, if that's okay.
Ooh, you're pushing your luck.
I'll push away. Firstly, don't go there. Firstly, in the long tail, surely all TV is event TV to someone. So how do we actually plan and build for that? But also, secondly, we're talking a lot about brands, as in brands must do X, brands must do Y. What is the impact for heads of advertising, heads of digital in-house rather than agency?
I think it could be a bright future for them, for sure, but I think we have to stop kind of thinking about campaigns. And that's a really big shift and a hard shift. But that's definitely kind of our viewpoint as well at Facebook, is that it's not about, what was the great example about one of the earlier panels today, and one of the panelists actually, to prove a point, just got up and kind of mid-sentence and left the room. And everybody waited, and then he came back and he said, "That's what brands do on social networks, and it's not nice, is it?" And everyone said, "No, it's not nice." And I think that's, and agencies can, and I think there are some really clever folks out there that are trying to get ahead of this curve. But that's a big shift. But if that happens, and if they can embrace that, then there's definitely a future, for what they bring to the table.
That looks like that. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panelists.